The global housing crash is spreading. Contagion is here because if you look at data reported by Redfin, there's over 180 cities in America that have now experienced a drop in home prices in just the last 3 months. Like Denver, for instance, is down 5.9%. Flagstaff, Arizona, a big vacation destination, has seen prices go down by a whopping 18%. San Jose, Silicon Valley, has seen a 13% decline. Seattle has seen a 9% decline. Austin has seen a 10% decline. And this is just the start of price decline in many of these markets, because if we look at some projections on just how overvalued some of these housing markets are and how much further they have to fall, I mean, the numbers are looking pretty scary. I have my own home price prediction model here with Reventure Consulting, and I'm predicting a lot of markets are going to go down another 25 to 30%. But there's other projections out there saying prices could go down by not just 30%, but by 50 to 60% in certain markets, which would be amazing news for a lot of you prospective home buyers out there. If we could see a 50 or 60% decline. I mean, take a look at this data. This article from Fortune is talking about the 183 housing markets that Moody's, a ratings agency, thinks are going to have the biggest price decline. We could see Moody's thinks Dallas is 42% overvalued. They think Austin is 61% overvalued. They think Boise, Idaho is 72% overvalued. They think Phoenix is 54% overvalued. And they're pretty bearish, and pretty much all of Florida is like 35 to 50% overvalued. And what has me really intrigued about this data from Moody's is it signals a big shift in the mainstream perspective on the US housing market. Like when you have Moody's, which is a ratings agency, saying, there could be a 60% decline in a market like Austin, Texas, that's going to send shockwaves around the US housing market, especially to a lot of real estate investors who are buying in many of these cities, who are using Moody's to actually rate their mortgage-backed securities. Well, this is going to be a big problem, and it's going to cause an even further contagion and a further spreading of the housing market crash over the next year. But not only is it spreading in America, it's spreading across the globe. This is a globally synchronized housing crash where values are going down in almost every country across the world. For instance, in Toronto, in Canada, there's been a 15% decline in sale prices. Meanwhile, in Sweden, there's been a 9% decline in sale prices, while in Australia, there's been a 7% decline year to date. And the global nature to this housing crash means that it's one that's going to be long and is going to be deep, because there's only been 2 other globally synchronized crashes in world history. The first occurred in 1929 at the start of the Great Depression, the second in 2007 at the start of the Great Financial Crisis.
And the reason a global housing crash is much worse than just a localized crash is because there's a contagion element that spreads throughout the entire world financial system, where banks don't want to lend, people don't want to buy, and it just becomes common knowledge to everyone across the world that real estate is a poor investment. Now, it's important for you to understand that we're in the beginning stages of this global crash. And if we go back, for instance, to the one that occurred in 2007, we can see that prices started going down in September 2006. And it actually took a while for that crash to get going. Prices went down for about 2 years before the Lehman Brothers crisis. They were going down maybe 0.5% per month, 1% per month, which wasn't much on a monthly basis, but it started adding up in that last crash over 2 years. And then the bottom fell out on the housing market after Lehman Brothers.
So for those of you out there, and I know there's some of you out there, you can leave a comment if this is you below. I know some of you are getting frustrated by the pace of this housing crash. Like maybe you'll get excited at seeing a 7% decline in sale prices in Vegas, or an 8% in Boise, Idaho, or a 7% decline in San Diego. Those are positive movements, but they're not enough. And I know a lot of you are looking at those prices and saying, well, they're still way too high. When are they really going to start to collapse so I can actually buy a house? And I'm going to answer that question later in this video, when I think the bottom is going to fall out on the US and the global housing market. Because we still have a lot of holdouts out there, a lot of people who are in denial about this housing crash, particularly actually a lot of sellers now on the market. A lot of sellers are now starting to push back a bit against home buyers. We're seeing a decline in new listings coming to the market as certain sellers don't want to list now in the fall of 2022. They think they're going to have a better chance to sell their home at a high price in the spring. Meanwhile, there's other sellers who are already on the market who are refusing to cut their price and who are just willing to let their house sit on the market for 100 days or 200 days. And this is actually a very normal part of a housing crash or an asset crash, is that there's like that initial wave of frenzy and anxiety that we had in June and July. And then there's a situation all of a sudden where people say, oh, well, it's not going to be that bad. I'm going to push back. I'm going to be in denial. And the denial stage is people saying things like, oh, my house, it's still a great market, even though prices have gone down 5 to 10%. There's going to be a rebound going forward. I'm not going to sell quite yet. But what you got to remember, folks, is after denial comes panic, and then comes capitulation. And this panic and capitulation of the market crash is going to take hold over the next 6 to 12 months as sellers realize all of a sudden that they don't have a choice anymore about whether to list their home, about whether to cut their price. Their hand is going to be forced by a recession that continues to get worse. Their hand is going to be forced by home builders delivering a record number of homes actively under construction into the housing market over the next year. That's going to be inventory that sellers are going to have to compete with. Also going to see foreclosures continue to increase. They're up by over 100% year over year. We're now seeing in certain markets they're accelerating further in August and September. I want to touch upon those foreclosures real quick because I know a lot of you are wondering, when is the foreclosure backlog really going to burst? When's the dam going to burst? When am I going to get a cheap foreclosure? And no doubt you're going to have your opportunity. In fact, in certain cities like in Dallas, in North Texas, there's been a huge surge in foreclosures in just the last couple months. But really, what you got to understand is foreclosures don't cause the housing crash. They are the result of the housing crash. And so you folks can understand this, especially the timing of the crash and foreclosures. Let's go back to the last housing crash. Again, home prices started going down month over month in September 06, which was 2 years before Lehman Brothers, but that was also more than 3 years before foreclosures peaked in America. Foreclosures didn't peak until January 2010 in the US housing market during that last crash. And the reason that's the case is for two reasons. Number one, at the beginning of the crash, when prices are only down maybe 5%, a lot of people who are in default still have a lot of equity in their home and can still sell their home. But then if you fast forward and maybe prices are now down by 15% a year later, and their inventory on the market is huge and there's no buyers, well then that defaulted borrower is not able to sell their property anymore and the bank is going to take it. So just like in the last crash, there needs to be a certain level of home price declines that happen first before we see those foreclosures really burst onto the market. And of course, the second thing is the recession. Right now in America, there's been a lot of layoffs. The recession has started, but we still have a near record low unemployment rate of 3.7%, which means a lot of people still have a job and are able to pay that mortgage. But as the unemployment rate inevitably surges over the next 1 to 2 years, more and more people are going to lose their job, aren't going to be able to pay their debt service, and are going to be foreclosed on. I know a lot of you want to know when. When is the bottom going to fall out on the foreclosures? When is the bottom going to fall out on the US housing market? When is this recession going to get worse? And most importantly, when are you going to be able to look out into the housing market on Zillow in your neighborhood and find a home that you really think is cheap enough to entice you to buy? And I think the thing and the perspective that you all should develop as a home buyer or real estate investor out there is one of patience. Patience is going to be rewarded during the housing crash. You don't want to be someone who gets impatient, rushes into the market at a 5% or 7% decline, and then gets smashed as prices go down by 40%. And that's exactly what happened to people in the last housing downturn. Like, values started going down in September 06, month over month, and then it was incremental through the end of 07. A lot of people said, oh, minor correction, the market's not going to actually crash by 40%, and they bought into it only to get wiped out completely. So it's important to remember that a lot of what we're experiencing today with, the crash happening, but maybe not as fast as you would want, and with sellers kind of being in denial, and with conflicting narratives and messages, this is all normal for the beginning stages of a housing crash. And I would encourage a lot of you to actually keep your focus on is not just what's going on in your market, but the global perspective. We're in a globally synchronized housing crash where central bankers around the world are increasing interest rates at the fastest rate in 3 decades into an asset bubble and into a debt bubble. This is not going to end well. There's going to be huge declines in asset prices across the board. There's going to be a big recession. Patient home buyers and real estate investors out there are going to be rewarded as the global housing crash continues to spread. Now, one last thing, everyone. While there's 183 cities where home prices have gone down in America over the last 3 months, according to Redfin, there are actually certain cities where home prices have continued to increase. Markets in blue on this map, like Little Rock, Arkansas, Augusta, Georgia, Knoxville, Tennessee, Louisville, Kentucky, Cleveland, Ohio, Buffalo, New York, and Hartford, Connecticut have continued to see home prices increase over the last 3 months while they're going down in pretty much all other parts of America.
Now, this is funny, right? Why are those cities in particular, which are kind of boring markets that not a lot of people talk about, why are they still appreciating? Could they be diamond in the rough housing markets that are going to avoid the housing crash? Well, I'm going to do a video about that topic. I'm going to cover the 10 cities that I would actually still buy in during the housing crash. These are going to be cities where values aren't going to go down by much, or even values could be increasing in these cities. These cities have particular characteristics that are going to help them weather the storm for you as a home buyer, real estate investor. By and large, they did pretty well in the last housing crash. I think they're going to do well in this housing crash. Make sure to leave a like and a comment down below if you want to see that video on the 10 cities that are not going to crash during the crash.
The data on home prices in this video came from Redfin, comparing the median sales price at the end of August to the median sales price at the end of May. And you can see here the list of the markets that have gone down the most. Oakland, San Jose, San Francisco, and Lake Havasu City, Arizona are all above 10%. Austin's at 10%. Seattle, Atlantic City, Boise, Naples, Las Vegas. Those are the top 10 markets with the biggest price declines. If we go further down the list, we see Dallas, San Diego, Stockton, New Orleans, Prescott Valley, Arizona, Anaheim, Boulder, Sacramento, Provo, Denver, Charleston, Phoenix, Durham, LA, Tacoma, Washington. These markets are predominantly on the west coast of America, high-priced cities with a lot of tech presence. These are the ones that have fallen the most.